Welcome everyone to another episode of Attacks of Opportunity. I'm Eric Hardenbrook. I'll be your substitute this week. We're continuing to dig into our favorite hobby, Dungeons and Dragons, and today we have something extra special and fun. We're going to chat with James Crane, a professional dungeon master, one of the chief folks at Crumbling Keep, who offer up games for hire. To me, it sounds like a dream job, but let's see what James has to say.
Never do it. I'm warning everyone now.
So, I mean, it's a dream. It sounds like a dream job. Can you tell us a little bit about how you get to the point of being a dungeon master for hire?
Well, to be honest, when I first started doing it, it kind of happened by accident. I had a friend who sent me a message one day. It was a friend that I gamed with often, and he recently started working at a new company. He sent me a message and was like, "Hey, I know you do a lot of dungeon mastering. I have this crew at work that wants to learn how to play. This is how much they would pay for a weekly game." And I was like, well, yes, obviously I want to do that. So that's what kind of started me off, but it also got the wheels turning from there as to how can I do this more? How can I make this a thing? So realizing that there were people out there that wanted to pay for a dungeon master was a great first step, but then figuring out the rest of it all was a whole nother journey.
So the rest of it all, meaning, is this your quote unquote day job?
This is my day job. I mean, it's pretty cool because my day job is doing this, and then my other part-time job is creating content for Dungeons and Dragons and other games as well. So it's not a bad life, you know?
Well, that sounds absolutely fantastic. So when you say creating content, you're making modules, you're writing stories. Where does that lead?
See, all the above, a little bit of everything. But yeah, so before I started doing the dungeon mastering for hire, my best friend from high school, Brad Kishbaugh, and we were playing, this was, okay, so step back just a sec. I was living in Portland, Oregon. He was living in Pennsylvania. So this was long before COVID, but we wanted to keep playing games together. So we were using Roll20. And like so many people, we were like, this campaign's really good. We should make it a podcast. So we had really big podcast dreams of grandeur and started a company to deal with all that. And it's morphed a lot away from that since when we began. We are no longer doing a podcast. So I started writing blog articles while I was waiting to play the next game or whatnot. And then that got me into making usable content. And that got me into writing, it's kind of a mix between, for a long time, we were doing a lot of really small bite-sized things. Every day we'd release either a new NPC you can use for your game or a one-page adventure, when those were really fun. It's oddly harder than you think because you have to condense everything into one page and make it a usable, complete story start to finish. You throw in a map and that's a lot of real estate. We were doing items, and one of our favorite series was to Bossums and Bombs, which was all 5e plants you could use for your game for the herbalism proficiency and things like that. And then we started doing modules and adventures. And currently, we have a Patreon that we release most of this from. Currently, we're doing a kind of pseudo fantasy ancient Egyptian setting, like a hex crawl type of thing, which that's been a lot of fun. And we're branching into our first non-Dungeons and Dragons thing. We currently have a Kickstarter up on Kickstarter for Marching Order, which is our little solo RPG zine that has kind of a choose your own adventure type element thing to it. So yeah, that's the content part of it all.
Wow, that sounds like you've got a ton of things. So the Kickstarter's active right now?
Yes, the Kickstarter is active right now. We've been kind of blown away by the reception of it. The first day it launched, we funded in the first hour, and then by the end of the day, we didn't have any stretch goals left. So we're like, great, let's figure that out. So we got
Well,
together a
that's
whole.
good problems to have.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Overwhelming in the best possible way.
That's really fantastic. So it sounds like you're creating a ton of stuff, but how busy is your schedule in terms of actually running games?
So actually running games, I have 4 of those a week that I do.
Wow.
Yeah. By the time I hit that last game, it's I'm like, oh, that was a lot. Can't wait for the weekend and maybe play a game with friends or something like that. So that is kind of the one downside. I was talking to someone not too long ago, and they asked, like, has it ruined your love of the game? I'm like, well, not really, but when it comes to like actually playing with my friends, when I get that chance to play an RPG with friends, we I don't run Dungeons and Dragons, or at least not 5th edition. I think it's a great system and I love it, but it's what I do for the other 4 games a week. So by the time I get to that, I just crave something different. So I like to run either like, I don't know, maybe like more old school Dungeons and Dragons or like another game altogether.
I could understand that. I could understand that. I will admit freely that I have not made the transition to 5e, um, nor did I transition to 4th edition. I kind of got stuck back at 3.5, and that's where I've lived for a long time.
It's not a bad place to be stuck. I mean, I say that, but embarrassing admission, I started with 2nd edition and somehow missed 3rd and 3.5 altogether before trying 4th, which was quite the jump.
I bet. Yeah, John and I have talked before that we started sometime significantly before then. Uh, and we'll just leave it at that. So this sounds like a fantastic thing still. Um, how much does the real world really get in the way? How flexible are your games? I mean, are you rigid, like, okay, we start at 6 and we're done at 7:30 and that's it? Or how does that work?
Well, people pay for a certain time slot and like life comes up, right? Like as anyone who has ever tried to play in or run a D&D game knows, like schedule things happen. And that's just kind of part of what you have to plan for, that's one of the differences, like as opposed to when I had a like regular full-time job, is I have to plan for when I'm working, but also for when the work isn't there, because that's not as steady as knowing that I have a 9 to 5 that I'm going to 5 days a week. Don't get me wrong. I love what I'm doing and I have don't feel like trading it off or anything. But that is one of the things. Sometimes groups have to cancel for a variety of reasons, and that's valid. So the goal is that to make sure that, like, as far as scheduling all that and whatnot, finances, is to make sure I'm making enough that like a group not being there that week isn't going to break me or anything like that.
So have you, since we're talking in real world terms, have you seen an uptick in business since this whole COVID thing?
Honestly, that's yes. I know I was mentioning before we started recording that I had recently moved to Chicago. So I moved to Chicago a little bit before COVID. And that was when I decided, like, okay, new city. I'm going to see if I can't make a go of this full time and not make it a part-time thing anymore. And honestly, it was like January, February of last year where I started thinking, like, okay, maybe I need to go put some applications in, find a job while I work on this. And then suddenly I have like no one can go anywhere. So I have games pouring in online. So yeah, I definitely saw an uptick with COVID. So on the opposite side of things, though, right the week when lockdown started here was the first week that I was going to have my I had planned a event called, what was it, like Drinks and Dragons or something along those lines, where it's going to be a beer tasting and Dungeons and Dragons game at a local bar. So unfortunately that plan failed, but the digital games definitely picked up for sure.
It sounds like a reasonable trade-off if we're going to stay safe.
Indeed. I don't regret it at all. And it would have been fun had it happened, but that's not the world we live in.
Yeah, for sure. So we'll jump off of the sort of the more general stuff and see if we can dig in a little bit. We'll get game specific. I was looking over the stuff on your site, and I believe you have, it's the Isles of Samsaras. Is that your main game world? Do you use that for all of your games, or do you make various stuff up on the fly? How does that all work?
So the Isles of Samsaras was is largely a place that we set a lot of our modules in. And at one point in time, we were thinking about world books and things, but we thought it might just be more fun to kind of let the story come together through the various adventures. We have one that's in play testing right now. That's a big murder mystery set on one of the isles. So the Elves of Samsaras, the 10-cent tour of that. I don't want to bore anyone for 2 hours with my extensive world building. The 10-cent tour is that it was a world that was created by demons. They made the world, they made the creatures on the world to torture and harass. And then the creatures of the world found reset. Made the world, harassed the beings. They got bored and kind of went off for a while. The people of the world found new gods. And then eventually the demons came back and they were like, whoa, what happened when we weren't looking? And a big war started between all the evil things and all the good things. And one of the first wizards of the world opened up a rift to another plane and pulled in dragons who ended up saving the world. Good dragons, bad dragons, all the dragons. They drove out the demons and then kind of put themselves in their place as the rulers of the world. So dragons are worshipped as gods, even though they're not, but the people living there don't know that. So that's kind of like the basis of it. So a lot of it has a kind of creepy, the darkness is coming back in type feel to it. I think a lot of the adventures have a bit of a similar pace of like the old Conan stories or like Call of Cthulhu, where it kind of starts semi-normal and slowly degrades until you have this horrible, monstrous horror thing. But I like to start things in the realm of banality and kind of like go from there. So yeah, that's a lot of our published things we do there. But as for the professional games, oddly enough, I'm not running a single one in that world.
Really?
Yeah. A lot of it is, and it depends on the group, but a lot of them I'd like to be like, well, what kind of game are you looking for first? Like, what are you into? What part of this game appeals to you? And kind of go from there. Like I have a kids group that kind of wanted to play in a more magical type of setting. So I brought out back the old like Planescape thing from 2E and started going through that. And a lot of them I end up like, if their characters have good backstories in their group, if they have like an intriguing backstory, I'm like, great, I'm just going to base the world around this as opposed to try and fit it vice versa. So a lot of world building goes into those games as well. It'd probably be easier if I just had a world I set them in, but where's the fun in that?
Yeah, it does sound like it's a really good time, and it gives you a lot of variety and a lot of variation. Um, I think it also gives you a lot of variation opportunity as far as rule sets go. How rigid are you with rule sets? I mean, do you have your own house rules that you issue all the time, or do you enforce like every written rule ever? I mean, I'm throwing encumbrance out right out the gate, but
Right. Because everyone does, right? Like, do you have way too much stuff? We'll talk about it then. So whenever I have a new group, there's like a few questions I ask them to kind of get a feel of like, again, like what parts of the game they're interested in. And one of those is like, how do you feel about character death? Is that something you want a lot of? Do you not want any of it? Like, I feel like it's valid either way of people wanting character death to be a real present thing, because without losing, what does winning mean, right? But at the same time, I can also understand people who are like, I want to see my character story through to the end, and I don't want to have to make another character up mid thing. But yeah, we hit there's a lot of rules we hit like that. I'm like, how do you feel about making sure you have enough torches and arrows with you? Do you want to keep track of that? Does that sound fun? Or do you not want to know if you have enough rations for breakfast? Personally, I kind of like the record keeping of that, like the strategic part of like, and some other systems with their simpler encumbrance, I even like that. So you can make sure like, okay, you have 10 slots. Let's make sure you bring the right things in those 10 slots or things. But a lot of players don't want to do that kind of record keeping. And I get that too. Like there's that line between mechanics and fiction. And I like to find where everyone likes to put it for them. And some people want more of the fiction and some people want more of the game mechanical parts of it. So that said, every game is a little different. There's even one group that I have 2 games with a week, and even the house rules between those 2 games is different.
Wow.
Yeah, like there's one that's like a very much higher powered thing where like every game I give them a roll to have something miraculous happen. And then in the other game, like that's out the window, but they have, we're actually doing another game in one of the 5e settings they published, Theros, which introduced some kind of fun mechanics of, it's a kind of Greek god-esque type thing. Like it started with, okay, I'll make this like quick as possible. It started with Magic the Gathering. They set a card set in this world called Theros that was kind of Greek god-y. And then because Wizards of the Coast owns Dungeons and Dragons too, they made it into a campaign world. But it has mechanics that actually interact between your character and serving their god. The more things they do in the name of whatever god they serve, the more powers they get, which was kind of neat to see that actual like fiction and mechanical thing intersect. But yeah, like that's a rule that doesn't exist in their other games. So it definitely changes up a lot.
Do you have any rules that are completely homebrew that don't come out of any of the rule books that you use all the time?
And I think one I have that is pretty good. Like I keep it, and I think this is great for any game, really. Unless it's like, especially with a group that maybe you're not familiar with and things like that. Any kind of inter-party conflict, we have to stop the game and both players have to talk about it outside of their characters and be like, hey, do you both want this? Do you both want to abide by what happens? Like, let's make sure this is a thing, because that's a really silly thing to foster for hurt feelings over. So that's a mechanic I bring to a lot of games. But the rest of them, yeah, I don't know if I have any that go for every game. Like some of them we do kind of hex crawls where it's like every new hex, let's roll to see if you get a random encounter and see what happens. Other ones, they may never see a map and it's more, okay, fictionally this happens next, let's advance the story here and then this happens. So it's yeah, they're all really different experiences, even as far as what homebrew rules pop up.
That's very cool. And I only asked the question because I actually have a homebrew rule that I across the board is number one, I say, listen, we're playing a game. And it's exactly what you said about the character fighting. If the characters are fighting in the game, that's okay.
Right.
But outside, the players have to understand that that's all that is.
Yeah, because that's
So
a very
it's
different thing.
always rule number one. It's a game. If we're not having fun and making this cool, amazing story together, then none of the other rules matter.
Well said. Very well said.
So yeah, I totally see that. I agree with that 110%. I think it's fantastic. And I love the group storytelling aspect of it. I also love when players come up with something that so blindsides you that you're just stop and you go, wait, you what?
Right. Yeah.
You get a lot of those?
Yes, and I've changed the way I've planned games, and I don't plan as many solutions anymore as I just plan the problems, because if I plan the solutions, there's a tendency to want to kind of push groups in the direction of the like, wow, I've made this puzzle and I've offered you one very certain way to get out of it, to like kind of have them go there and recognize my brilliance. But instead, I'm just like, here's a problem. When you say something that is reasonable and makes sense, we'll start rolling some dice and go through it. And that said, Yes, there's still absolutely times I get thrown for a loop. There's absolutely times where I'm like, okay, I never foresaw that happening in a million ways. You circumvented this huge thing that I thought was going to be the entire plot this week. Okay, so let's roll with that. Hopefully this next round of combat takes long enough that I can come up with a whole fallback plan by the time we're done. Great.
Do you I totally I find myself so empathetic to that position because I've seen some of the most insane things, particularly when you start playing. I am very loose with rules and I tend to err on the side of story.
Mm-hmm.
So if it makes sense to the story, whether or not it's your sphere as a cleric or whether or not it's, we can start to work with that. Let's find a way to hammer the rules around to make it work. And one of my favorites was someone completely new to the game.
The best.
Started digging a trench with a helmet in the middle of combat, and I was kind of like, "What are you doing?"
Yeah, where's this going?
And then she used the enlarge spell on the trench.
Nice. So
So
you have like a pit, right?
an inverse. Normally, you think you take an object and make it bigger, and she took a negative space and made the negative space bigger, and put this giant trench between her and the monsters that were trying to eat her.
That's like, I love new players. And new players are going to throw me for a loop more than players I've been playing with for a while every time, because once you play for a while and you really start to understand mechanics, you start to game the mechanics,
Yeah.
But new players don't have that. It's all from scratch for them. So they're not thinking that way. They're thinking like, okay, well, there's a bunch of monsters that are going to kill me. They're not thinking like, okay, well, I have this many hit points. I should be able to hit them with this spell and it should be fine. They're more thinking like, I don't want to get killed by monsters. I'm going to make a really big trench in the most ridiculous way possible. And they just, every time, new groups, they're great with that.
Yeah, I really enjoy it. So, do you start off when you have a new group come on for a new game? Do you start them off as first level? Is that where you always start, or do you allow like you take some groups of like power gamers or whatever, and they're like, no, we all want to start at fifth level or something like that?
Yeah. Well, I think I have started at higher levels before. And those seem mostly one shots I run higher levels. Like campaigns seem to start at level 1. And I think a large part of the difference there is like, when it comes to the people that are paying for these games, a lot of times, like if it's a one shot, they've either never played before and they just want to try it out, or they want something special. And those are the folks who will start at like level 10 or like want to do that level 20 one shot or something like that. But when it comes to like new groups who are starting a new campaign, which is like a lot of people that want to try it out, are people who they want to try the game, they're intimidated by it because they've never tried it before, and there's so much media out there nowadays of people playing the game, where you get like, you don't get the full context because they can't stop and explain all the rules. So they get that kind of experience. They want to jump into it, but they kind of want it to be guided, and they want to be like, they don't want to just go down and meet some random group who might make them feel stupid for not what's going on or anything like that. So those folks like are a large part of people that will pay me to play the game. And with them, generally, yeah, we always start at level 1 because there's just a lot to learn about a character at level 1 and more with every level. Especially like I said, I skipped 3, so I'm not sure how much each level mattered there. But in like 5e, you're almost getting a new power every level, A lot of times, honestly, for new groups, like people never played before, I generally suggest like, hey, let's play a one-shot first with pre-made characters, because that way, when we start the game for real, and you're making your own characters, these numbers are going to make a lot more sense, and you're going to be a lot happier with the character you end up creating.
A really, really good way to look at it. I wish I had thought of that before.
Yeah, it's just, you don't know what an 18 in strength does until you play a character with an 18 in strength, you know, or like when you don't know what an attack roll is. I almost said THAC0 doesn't matter, but that doesn't matter anymore. But you know, an attack modifier doesn't matter.
It matters to me.
Right. THAC0 right here. Honestly, second is still one of my favorite additions.
Oh, that's fantastic. So do you find with these groups, is there a hesitancy to do the role playing, or do you see some kind of effect from these bigger or more famous groups that are playing and broadcasting their games? Where's the role play land, or is it rule play?
And that is definitely another thing that really kind of varies from group to group. You know, like I have a group that like really enjoys the story portion of things, but seemingly more from a vantage point view. You know, they like to see the story happen, but they don't necessarily engage with it in a like role-playing manner. But they love to go on like a dungeon crawl. Like I gave them this map to explore, and they immediately were like, we're going underground into the dungeon. That's the first place we're going. And we're going to clear it out room by room by room. And that's what they enjoy doing. And they'd like to, it's not that they don't like to interact with the role-playing part of it, but they just really like interacting with the strategic part of it and playing with the powers and the spells and figuring out the best thing to do about the zombie beholder behind that door. You know, but then other groups, yeah, I think some other groups, a lot of them, if it's their first time, they take a little bit of warming up, right? Like it's a little bit of stage fright, you know, you gotta get comfy with it. But then when they get there, they get there. And I think as a DM, and especially with like some of my longer running friend groups I played with, I get this more. One of the most rewarding experiences for me as a DM is when I'm doing nothing. When I just have to like sit there and listen to the players like either plan strategically, you know, that's also a rewarding thing for me is when they're like, okay, let's figure out what to do with this. And they take half an hour planning out a 5-minute encounter. But also when they just get so in character that they're like having a scene by themselves and I don't have an NPC in there or anything. And I'm just like, I'm just going to wait until it's an appropriate point to either bring the next happening out to disturb the scene or until they decide to do something different, whichever comes first.
And then every once in a while, you can just mix in a little something to stir their anxiety and spin them off for another 10 minutes.
Yes, absolutely. Oh man, the little things that people will get hung up on. And you know, they don't know that rustle of leaves was actually just the breeze, or that this weird statue is not going to come to life and follow them down the hallway, you know, like they I don't know if players are just paranoid by nature or if we as DMs are responsible for this. If so, I'm sorry to all the players in the world, but
I'm taking a lot of blame on that one. I take the heat from my group all the time.
Just one mimic and it ruins it for everybody.
Even my daughter watches shows on television now and goes, how come nobody ever looks up?
Oh yes, that was one of my last TPKs was a roper on the ceiling, and it was it was unfortunate. And this was definitely like this is a group that was like, yes, if death happens, we do not want you to shield us from it. We don't want any special treatment. Like okay, cool. And so they were happy with it, and they're like, great, time to make new characters, start a new campaign.
That's wow, that's a lot, and that's really good that they're into that.
Yeah, right. And this is one of the kids groups too. So I'm like, wow, this is way to go, guys.
Yeah, we're done with that one. All right.
Mm-hmm. and they all have like 10 character concepts lined up that they want to try anyway. So it does kind of give them an excuse for that.
That's fantastic. I'm trying to think if there were other things. There were a couple of questions that sort of rattled around in the back of my head, and we just sort of rolled along. And now I'm trying to search back. Like, where were we? We talked about settings. We've talked about characters and characterization. is there any part of it, any part of the game that really you try to avoid for any of these groups? Let's go back, and I know
Mhm.
for kids groups you probably have to have a certain different consideration than you do for adult groups.
Totally, totally.
But are there any parts or aspects of the game that you specifically try to avoid, or do you just go with what they want?
So, that I'm okay. So, very varied answer here. Uh, when a new adult group wants to start a game with me, or the other folks that I represent as well, because I now have other DMs that are doing this. Uh, we send out all the new players a little form that's like, hey, thanks for wanting to do this thing. We want to see where your comfort levels lie with certain things, because we don't want you to pay us to creep you out and make you feel like you don't want to be here, So it's like a little Google survey form they fill out, and then we look at all those. And we're like, great, this group, these are the topics that we're always going to avoid. And there's things I will always avoid myself as well, because I don't want them in my game, So yeah, it's for all of us, it's like a mix of like what they want as players and what we want as dungeon masters to not deal with. That said, I have this one group that they just like, however heavy metal I make the descriptions of a room, they just seem to get more into it. So like, it's definitely kind of like part like, okay, let's look at this form, and part feeling out of not only what they don't want, but what makes them excited, how visceral they want it. And they like wading through the blood and guts. So I give it to them.
That's something. Yeah, the thought that crossed my mind specifically was way back when they did the Book of Vile Darkness.
Oh
Was the
yeah.
specific example that sort of sprung to mind immediately. I was like, "Oh, I bet there's a lot of people that aren't interested in getting into that aspect of things, or where you land with those sort of like if someone goes, well, I'll just roll out some vile thing, and everyone kind of goes, ooh,
Yeah. It's we have some safety tools in games too. Like aside from the like initial like, hey, let's check in about what we want, what we don't want. I make sure all the groups know at any point, like if anyone feels uncomfortable, like say something. We'll stop the game. We'll figure it out. Like I never want anyone walking away from a game being like, that was not something I want to do again. Um, like even in one of my friend games, even like I was playtesting one of the adventures I had written, and as you can imagine, in a world created by demons and ruled by dragons, like there's like some like kind of dark subject matter.
bad things happen.
Yeah, bad things happen, and there was like a scene that was there were some cannibalistic monsters, and it was a little intense. And my friend checked in. It's like, oh, okay, I need a moment with that. And we talked about it, and it let me know, like, cool, I need to scale this back with this person. And they were thankfully responsive enough to let me know, like, as soon as they started feeling like, okay, like let's pause there. Um, and I think that's really valid. Not everyone has the same comfort level with everything, and like that's with my friend group. With professional games, it's like even more so. Like I never want someone to be paying me for something that leaves them uncomfortable. Some people like going to horror movies. Some people actively avoid them, and I want to give them
Yeah,
what they want.
yeah, that's fantastic. Um, I really think that that's the core, that the essence of this is this group experience, and to be able to give somebody that who hasn't maybe experienced it before, or um, let them sort of come up and learn and get new experiences like that. But on the flip side, have you ever gotten so deep into a game that you're like, wow, how did we get here?
Hmm. I I don't think I've done it with any of the professional games, to be honest. Like where I personally was that deep into the game. Like with all of those, I think I was able to like always be removed enough to like see what's happening and everything. But then some of my like games for fun or whatnot, there are definitely times that it almost felt like, oh man, I'm surfacing for air after like an hour of being like deep into this, you know, like of either really getting into character or like, you know, like I have players in my friends groups that are like really tolerant of a nice slow burn adventure, you know, like if we play an entire session without a combat encounter or an entire few sessions without a combat encounter, that's fine because that's not necessarily what we're there for, you know. But with some of those, yeah, there's definitely been times where it's like, okay, I feel like I'm coming up for air. I feel like I've like had a lot of emotions tonight through all of this as well. Um, and those are yeah, those are great moments.
Yeah, yeah, and there's one I have one of my own. It was somebody else was running the game, and we were way deep in, and it was a thing that we had done before, and I went into this place, and I said, oh, can I get my standard order at this restaurant or whatever it was? So we're playing a modern, like a cyberpunk game,
Uh-huh.
and I said, how are my cheese slugs? And he said they're crispy on the outside and soupy in the middle, just like you like them. And we both, at that same moment, we both stopped and went, wow, all right, maybe we need to like get a drink or something, have a minute.
Right.
Because
That is really
we were way in. Like, all right, let's step back for a second.
and I could like, yeah, I could see that menu order, you know.
Like, this is just the encounter where we're seeing our regular contact to get the next job. We're good. All right, cool.
This, I'm guessing Shadowrun.
It was.
Yeah,
It
okay.
was
I
in
was like,
fact
everything
Shadowrun.
about this sounds Shadowrunny.
Yes, yes, one of my favorites. My favorite non D&D, because I just love the concept.
It's a fun world.
Yeah, it's super fun. Do you have any? Do you have a favorite that comes in second to D&D? I mean, Dungeons and Dragons clearly is the core. Is the
Yeah.
that's why we're here.
Right. Yeah. Like it's. I mean, it's hard to say if anything would have existed without it. Like, yes, there are those kind of like prototypey kind of RPGs that existed before it, but it was definitely what changed the game. But yeah, outside of it, kind of let's see if I can give a little view here. These are my game bookshelves over here.
I like it. I like it a lot.
Yeah, I just set up the new shelves the other day, and I was really happy about it. I have a few, and as far as like the more traditional like ongoing RPGs, I think my two favorites right now are Conan the Barbarian, a company called Modiphius got the licenses to it and made a really cool game that feels every bit as crunchy as Dungeons and Dragons, but operates very differently. A lot lower magic, you know, except for when there is magic, because, you know, the whole Conan vibe of like,
Sure.
suddenly there's an Eldritch Horror Beyond Reckoning, but until that, you're killing a lot of guards or things like that. But yeah, they've been putting out a lot of source books for it, and I am a really big fan of the system that they use for it. And then the second one is called Blades in the Dark, and the 10-cent tour Blades in the Dark is that it's kind of, the setting is kind of like a fantasy Victorian England, but with a lot more Tesla reactors and ghosts.
I like
And
it.
it reminds, yeah, the setting's really inventive. It's really cool. But it kind of reminds me a little bit of Gangs of New York, the movie, in that you're playing a bunch of thugs in this crew of thugs looking for your next score and battling or befriending all the other factions of thugs in the city. And the system is just so radically different than D&D, and it just it does some beautiful things. Like the dungeon master or the game master or whatnot, or whatever they call it in that game, you know, every game calls it something different.
Yeah.
Never rolls any dice at all. The players are the ones that roll, And the players even like decide what stats they want to use to roll things. So like where in Dungeons and Dragons, you might tell someone to make an investigation roll or perception roll. And this, they're like, I want to do this thing, and this is what I want to roll to do it. And as the person running the game, you get to decide how likely that is to succeed. You know, if you're using like scrap to try and study at a library, you might be like, okay, cool, that has a really low chance of doing anything functional for you.
Yeah.
But if you're using it to intimidate someone and maybe beat information out of them, you're like, okay, I can see how that stat would work for this. But it flows really, really well. And I'm just like, I'm really enamored of the system. I really love it.
Sounds really super interesting. I may have to even go look that one up.
I would really suggest it. I think it's one of the best games that has come out in the last few years. And they have an open source system for it as well. So there are other games coming out that are kind of piggybacking on that system. And one of the groups that I do professionally, we're taking a little Dungeons and Dragons break while one of the players can't be there for a few weeks. And so we're doing a kind of mini campaign, same system, but different world, kind of a sci-fi setting, and we're hacking it to go Star Wars-y with it. And it's been, I like it better than the actual Star Wars RPG, honestly, mechanically. It's been working really well. It's
Cool.
Really story-driven.
That's really excellent. So I think we want to pull together the story here at the end.
Oh yeah, fair.
And I want to circle back around to the beginning. So if you want to, if you can tell people where's your website, and is that the best way to get in touch with you?
So there's various ways. Like if you search Crumbling Keep on pretty much any social media, you'll find traces of us there. We're pretty active on all that. So always, like, if you want to get directly in touch with us, feel free to message us through there. That is absolutely fine. But we also do have a website at crumblingkeep.com. That'll take you to the general site. If you're looking for information specifically on the professional dungeon mastering, you can go to professionaldungeonmasters.com, and I'll redirect you to the right place. And yeah, I would like to take just a sec to talk about Marching Order, our Kickstarter that we have going on right now. If you go to marchingordergame.com, it'll take you to that. And this has been a really fun project. So every year, this is the third year running, Kickstarter has been doing this thing in February called Zine Quest, in reference to like the old, like, take the piece of paper, fold it over, photocopy things on it, put some staples in it, where people make RPG zines of all shapes and sizes. And there's like tons of D&D stuff, tons of not D&D stuff, things that are whole systems, things that are no system at all, just adventures and locations and hex crawls and like some just really awesome imaginative stuff that bites deeply into my wallet and it hurts, but it's just so cool. So this year we submitted our first zine for it, and it is called Marching Order. And as a throwback to like kind of the old school gaming of like when you went to any room or down any corridor, you need to know who your marching order was. You need to know who's in front, who's second, who's last, right? And it is a solo or cooperative RPG. So it, for those of you who ever like got into like the lone wolf type game books or have played like any of the Chaosium's Call of Cthulhu Alone Against series, it borrows from those concepts where you can play it completely alone. It's got a kind of like choose your own adventure type feel to it, but with character sheets and dice. And you control a party of 4 rogues that are going on a delve to get coin to drink their troubles away. It's really kind of lighthearted in that aspect, but you have to figure out what their marching order is, because every character, instead of, you know, if you play Dungeons and Dragons on like a regular grid, you know how that works of like, okay, I move 5 feet and I can go this direction. On this, it's, think of it more of 2D. You have the person in front, the person behind them, and the person behind them. And the person in front might only be able to hit the person right next to them, i.e. like the first monster in line. But then the person all the way down the end of the line might be the archer who can hit someone like 6 spaces away. So it's really strategic in how you line up your people, because you also want the healer to be able to get to people and heal them. But then the monsters have abilities that will also affect your marching order. Like we were playtesting on Wednesday night, and one of the spiders has this ability just called arachnophobia, where they test your resolve, and if you fail, you actually move back in the marching order. So it's like half of it is just scrambling to get in the right spot, and half of it is hoping that nonsense doesn't happen to you. And the other half, yes, there's three halves, is this fun kind of strategic placement game wrapped up in a exploration dungeon crawl / choose your own adventure series.
That sounds awesome.
It's like, I don't want to pat myself on the back too hard, but I feel like I created the game. I know what's going to happen in the game fictionally if you make certain choices, but I've been playtesting it with friends, and just going through the combats and letting them make the decisions on where we go next has been a lot of fun for me. I've been really enjoying it.
That's fantastic. So it's marching order on Kickstarter.
Mm-hmm.
And crumblingkeep.com, and that will definitely get you in contact.
Yeah, that'll definitely get you in contact. If you go to crumblingkeep.com, there's a little messenger icon on the first page there, so you can message us with any questions, comments, concerns, whatever. We're generally pretty happy to hear from people, you know?
Cool. That's excellent. And as we're recording this, there's just over a week left in your Kickstarter.
Yeah, there's just over a week left, and we're definitely funded, but we have some really cool stretch goals we would like to meet. We have some really cool artists lined up, Wes James and Mustafa Bakir, and between the two of them, they have like such distinct styles. If you go check out the website, you'll see Mustafa's cover art on the cover of it, and it's just like such a great nostalgic old school feel to it. And like that's part of the reason we want to this Kickstarter to do better and hit these stretch goals, is because I want to give the artists more money to get more art, because it's just such an evocative part of the game.
Oh, I could not agree more. In fact, I actually one of the very rare Kickstarters that I jumped in on was Eye of the Beholder.
Tell me more.
Which is a film that they made talking about the art of Dungeons and Dragons. And they did interviews with all of these artists, like you knew them all. They're talking to Elmore, they're talking to, I mean, just like all that stuff that's in there. It's I believe it's actually available for streaming on Amazon right now.
I am totally checking this out right after we get off, because I didn't know this happened, and I need that in my life.
So I am a big fan of the art. The art of Dungeons and Dragons is a very big deal for me. So let's get out there. Let's get these stretch goals. Let's get some artists up here.
Yeah, help me pay artists.
I want to see some of this stuff. That's going to be fantastic.
And actually, on that note too, we have on Saturday. Well, it'll be done by the time this happens. We're releasing a free quick start of it with that awesome cover art as well for people that want to get a feel of it. So find us on social media and you'll figure out how to get that. But yeah, I'm definitely excited to get the full thing done with all that art put in there and all the like awesome little monsters and everything. They're, like such an evocative part of it all.
I'm going there next. So it sounds like we're at the part where we need to let everyone run to their keyboards and start clacking away. James, thank you so much for taking the time.
Absolutely.
We really appreciate you having a chance for Attacks of Opportunity, and I'll definitely look forward to maybe we can sort of keep some things rolling here and do this again sometime.
Totally. And I really appreciate you having me on. This was an absolute blast. I had a lot of time reminiscing about things, and like just, you ever hear certain people talking, you're like, I bet they play and run a good game. I like the way you think about things, That's all I'm saying.
I was going to say, you may see me sign up one of these days. All right. Well, thanks very much. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we will definitely be back with more attacks of opportunity.